This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham, Scott German. We're going to talk some UVA basketball. Women's basketball starting. Coaching news really on both sides, though, women's and men's. The big news, of course, of the last couple of days is the job filled now, the women's coaching job filled, and Tina Thompson is the name. And when Scott and I first heard this name yesterday, neither of us were familiar. I'm sure a lot of UVA basketball fans not familiar, but then once we became familiar with Tina Thompson, her resume seems very impressive. She retired from the WNBA as its all-time leading scorer back in 2013. Diana Taurasi eventually passed her in the all-time scoring list, but she was the first number one pick in the first WNBA draft back in 1997, won 4 WNBA championships, had a long career, 17-year career in the WNBA. She's a Naismith Hall of Famer class of 2018, 3 years as an assistant coach at University of Texas, including this past year as the associate head coach. And so that's a pretty good pedigree. And now we had all been wishing for, wish list kind of thing. Dawn Staley, of course, another great women's player, UVA tie women's player. But, Scott, my impression is I don't think we did too bad getting Tina Thompson. I think we did pretty good getting Tina Thompson. I want to get your thoughts.
Well, Chris, at first I thought it was Tina Turner and wonder if we get, Ike and Tina Turner. That shows you how little I knew about Tina Thompson. But, she certainly has a very glittering career as far as a player is concerned. I mean, she's Hall of Fame WNBA player. Now, I guess what we don't know, what we won't know for a while is, will that transition itself to the college game? She has an illustrious playing career, not much of a coaching career, just 3 years as a assistant coach, associate head coach. But, I'm not sure how the logistics work with the women's game. I mean, I don't know if that would be something that would be happening very frequent in the men's game for someone that's only been coaching for 3 years to land a head coaching job at a Power 5 conference school, especially a school such as Virginia. I don't know if that would actually be possible, but in the women's game, it seems like it is possible. And, she does have a great career as far as the player playing goes. So we'll just have to see how that transitions over to coaching. But from what I've read and what you've read, she's a dynamic coach. She really is actively involved in practices and getting out there and playing with the girls. And, hey, here's what's happening. Here's what's happening since Joanne Boyle left. And I guess this is a good thing, is that we're talking about Virginia women's basketball. And if that's a momentum builder, then I think it's a good thing. Now, whether we're talking about it positively this time next year, that's a whole different story. But right now, Virginia women's basketball is trending up. And from the tweets that I've read, everyone across the country thinks this is what I'm hearing, a grand slam hire. So I hope so.
The first thing I'll throw out is that I think the next important hire by Tina Thompson now, her first head coaching job, is going to be her top assistant, her associate head coach, essentially. Thinking to how, for example, Tony Bennett approached that. He brought Richie McKay along. Richie McKay, at the time, he lured him away from a head coaching job at Liberty. And so, having someone – Tina Thompson doesn't have experience building a program. And she's not inheriting a bad situation. The Virginia team won an NCAA tournament game this year, for the first time in a while, got into the tournament at the end of Joanne Boyle's 7 seasons. They're her first and only appearance in the NCAA tournament. So she's inheriting a program that theoretically isn't, not in bad shape. Not what Tony inherited, 10 years ago almost now from Dave Lato on the men's side. So she's inheriting, a program that's moving in the right direction. Tina Thompson has never head coached again, as we mentioned. So if she can find her Richie McKay, if she can find her Brad Soderberg, someone who can who has head coaching experience, who is willing to serve as her right-hand person, that can, that she can lean on, because now she has that 3 years of experience, 1 year as associate head coach at Texas, which is a big program too, a historically significant women's basketball program there in Austin. But her, as you mentioned, Scott, her experience is limited on the coaching side of things, and so there's so much that's going to be new for her. From the one hand, yeah, she's got a couple years of experience being on the road recruiting. She's not been responsible for laying down, what we're looking for. She's going to take over from the current staff. Their recruiting targets, their recruiting areas. She's got to build an entire staff. In fact, she's got to go out and fill all of her assistant positions, her support positions. Start making those contacts with high school coaches across Virginia, across the Mid-Atlantic, across the country. So those are all things she needs to do. Having someone in place who's been through those wars, who's built a program herself or himself, as the case may be, will be very important for her, because everything else about her, man, the fact that she can walk into a recruit's living room, sit there with mom and dad and the recruit, and flash those 4 WNBA championship rings, flash that Naismith Hall of Fame ring, that's going to help bring recruits. That's a given. And her staff will get more return phone calls, return emails, because, wow, Tina Thompson, Hall of Famer, that's the one recruiting me at Virginia with all the resources Virginia has. So, yeah, I think the next step is seeing how she fleshes out her staff and how quickly that happens, and then, how they can hit the recruiting trail. It's a pretty important time from a recruiting standpoint. So that's what I'm going to be looking for next, is just what she does in terms of, fleshing out her staff. Yeah,
and while you were talking about that, a whole bunch of stuff came into my mind. So, I think we both, I'm going to profess that I'm not, this is kind of new to me, women's basketball. I follow it from a distance a little bit, but so I'm not pretending I'm some guru as far as women's basketball. But here's what I'm thinking, and you might, if you think I'm off the path, feel free to bring me back in. But might not be surprising if she retains Tim Taylor, who is from Joanne's staff. Many thought might even get the job, just for some comfortability with the current players. Maybe she reaches out to Wendy Palmer, a former head coach, a UVA alumni at Clemson.
Yeah.
Maybe she reaches out to Wendy to bring that, to get that back to the program, some UVA blood, if you will. And here's what I think is critical, or maybe the most significant difference between two differences between the hire with Tina Thompson, Coach Thompson, coming to Virginia, and Tony King. She's not going to face what looks to be an insurmountable amount. The ACC is good as far as women's basketball. Sure, they have Notre Dame national champions. Maryland's not in the ACC anymore. Carolina's a little down. Duke's a little down. She's not going to face what Tony faced with the likes of UNC and Duke and Maryland at that time. So the going might be just a little easier to make some headway into that. Plus, recruiting. There are no one and done in women's basketball.
Yeah.
So to me, I thought one recruit that she had reached out to even before the announcement was me, that had recruited that a top recruit had tweeted out what a great hire. So it tells me that she's all about recruiting, and I think recruiting women's basketball, there are no players that are kind of so-called quote off limit, quote unquote. That you're the one and done's like Virginia might shy away from. She's not going to have that problem. So I look for a big upturn in recruiting in the next couple of years.
The only thing I'll throw out is that the women's ACC, Notre Dame national champs, Louisville made the Final Four. Florida State's been pretty established the last few years. Yeah, Duke and Carolina aren't what they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Those programs aren't what they used to be either. But yeah, there's those newcomers, so to speak. Florida State's really been surprising the last few years, and Louisville and Notre Dame have really been Notre Dame, of course, defending national champions. I throw.
I didn't mean to imply that it was a week, but you still don't. Florida State. I mean, as far as in my mind, that's not the same as the UNC or Duke. Some people would consider those two programs top 5 programs in all of college basketball. She's not. I just think Virginia isn't that far behind. It's very realistic that they could catch up to those programs with a couple of good solid recruiting.
I would put Notre Dame and Louisville sort of like the equivalent, pretty good equivalent to UNC and Duke right now in the men's, just because they've been consistent. Now, Florida State is sort of, I'm trying to think where I would put Florida. Florida State might be sort of the Maryland men that we were familiar with from 15 years ago. Knocking on the door, they're always good. They're not great, but they're good. But yeah, I mean, the 4th spot in the ACC, 4 through 15, then after, I think is very open. And you mentioned Wendy Palmer, Scott. That's exactly who I was thinking of when I went through my long soliloquy about hiring someone with experience. That's exactly who I had in mind. If Tina Thompson has a relationship with her or wants to have a relationship with her, you can bring someone in like Wendy Palmer, who has that who coached for 5 years at Clemson. She has the UVA ties. She's similar age as Tina Thompson. I think maybe a couple years older, but she's been through the wars. She's recruited. She's put together a program. It didn't win, but she knows the ACC as well as anybody from a player and coach perspective. That'd be interesting. I mean, I think that would be an interesting move. So if not her exactly, someone like that with a very similar resume could be very important for Tina Thompson as she builds this program. And again, it's not for 2 reasons, as Scott talked about here. For all you fans out there listening. For 2 reasons, it's not what Tony Bennett had in 2009 when he took the job. 1, she's taken over a program that just made an NCAA tournament. And 2, as Scott mentioned, it's not. I mean, you have a defending national champion in your conference, but it's certainly within the realm that even if all she does is hold serve next year and do as well as Joanne Boyle's last team does, she'll get us into a tournament, and then anything can happen from there. It'll take a year or 2 for her recruiting to really take hold. But I agree, Scott. I mean, I think if you have a coach with the name recognition she has, if she can put together a good staff, she'll get the recruits. And as we know, it doesn't matter what sport you're talking about, basketball, baseball, football, no matter what the sport is, you need to have the players. And, if she can recruit, and I imagine she can, that's the key here is using UVA's resources to put together a roster that can win championships. And it's hard for me to imagine someone with her pedigree as a player not being able to recruit just by saying her name is Tina Thompson. She's in the Hall of Fame. She won all these championships. She was the leading scorer in WNBA. Do you think I can coach you there? That to me says, she's got great potential to do exactly that.
So here's a question that I'll throw out. Had this hire taken place maybe late last week, or maybe even Saturday, do you think that would have changed the thinking, the decision of the Brunel young lady from Madison that announced on Sunday she was choosing Notre Dame?
I wonder, Samantha Brunel, actually from Wayne Monroe High School, so just up 29 from Charlottesville, basically the next road up. Yeah, she, reading the accounts of her decision, she said she had made a decision after her official visit to Notre Dame, which was before the national championship. It was back in early March, maybe. But you have to wonder, you've got someone in Tina Thompson who was a post player herself, and of course, not just a post player. She was the best in WNBA history. I mean, she retired as the all-time leading scorer. She's a post player. She coached post players. It's hard to imagine that if Virginia had quickly made this call, if they were, if they knew Tina Thompson was the coach all along, if they had made this announcement a week or 2 ago, that, I mean, her first phone call, her first email, her first text, whatever, would have been to Samantha Brunel, no question. And I don't know. You have to wonder if that might not have had an impact. I mean, I know when you read what Brunel said about Notre Dame, she liked the campus, she liked her visit, she felt like family, all this kind of stuff. But I tell you what, if you give me, and nothing against Muffet McGraw, the coach of Notre Dame, but if you give me the chance to be coached by an all-time WNBA great post player, and I am aspiring to be an all-time WNBA great post player just down the road from where I live, that's got to be something that would factor in. So, I don't know. We don't know much about the process. I'm sure more will come out about that in the next few days in terms of Carla Williams, the new AD at Virginia. I say new. She's been there for several months now, but we'll know more in the next few days, I'm sure, about, when she arrived at the decision to approach Tina Thompson for the job and how long that process took and that kind of thing. But, yeah, that's – you don't want to hire a coach just based on the chance to get the best player in the country because, they're not one and dones in women's basketball. They'll play 4 years in women's basketball. But, hopefully Tina Thompson's our coach for the next 20 years if things work out the way we all want them to. But that said, if we were going to settle on her, we might as well have done it a little sooner just to potentially impact the decision of, that number one recruit just up the road from us. So I agree, Scott. I think that it had to have had some sort of impact. On her decision. It would have had to. I can't imagine it wouldn't.
No, I agree. And I think it would have because, if the programs were anywhere near on equal footing, which meant if Virginia had a coach, Virginia had no coach. That young lady getting an education at UVA, now Notre Dame education is excellent as well, I'm sure. But as far as, proximity to games, I'm not certain about this. Again, not being that familiar with women's college basketball, but I don't know how those games are televised. If they're as easily as accessible over, TV like UVA, like men's games are. So it would certainly be a lot more convenient for friends or family to come down 29 North, 20 miles, and watch her play in person and watch her play road games. Of course, she'll play the same road games practically as she would at Virginia at Notre Dame because they're in the same conference. But, it would have been a lot easier had she been in Virginia. And keep in mind, it was a verbal commit. She hasn't signed. So, who knows? But, so the other question, which I would, again, being typically UVA fans, we always look for the dark cloud for good reason, because someone might have UMBC stamped on them. Was Don Staley a candidate? Did they reach out to Don? Did they get turned down? Is Tina Thompson the first choice, second, third? Did it take so long because had 3 or 4 people turned down the job? In my opinion, I don't think so. Now, I don't know if we'll ever know. I don't know if that question will be asked in the press conference tomorrow. If it is asked, I don't know how honestly it will be answered. But I really don't know if Don Staley did turn down. I'm just wondering if that. I would love to know. But was she approached? Did she reject, an actual offer, or did she make it kind of clear that, if you remember, she during the practice, I think right before the NCAA tournament game, she made it very clear she had no intentions of coming. So was she even approached? And if she were approached, did she turn down the UVA? So, I guess this whole point is this Virginia's first, was she Virginia's first choice? I think she's going to be I think she'll be a good coach. Whether she was first, second, third, or fourth, I don't think that's relevant right now. But it's something that's in the back of your mind you have to wonder about.
I think you're exactly right. That is the other big question with this, and I'm surprised it took us almost 20 minutes in a podcast to even get there, because that is we all wanted, we thought we wanted Dawn Staley, but then again, 9 years ago we thought we wanted Tubby Smith or Jeff Capel and not Tony Bennett, some guy we never heard of from Pullman, Washington, most recently. So, and this is the first high-profile hire of Carla Williams' tenure, first hire probably in general of her tenure. But if she is anything like her predecessors in terms of the way she deliberates, Craig Littlepage, Terry Holland, even before Littlepage, in terms of how they deliberate over their hires, they don't go with the popular choice. They don't go with what seems to be the flavor of the month kind of thing. Tony Bennett came out of nowhere. Bronco Mendenhall came completely out of nowhere. It didn't work out well, but Mike London was a surprise hire back when he got the job. Thinking way back to Al Groh when Terry Holland was the AD. Virginia, and generally speaking, the people they get end up the reaction from across the country is, hey, can't believe you got that guy. Can't believe you got that person. I mean, Joanne Boyle replacing Debbie Ryan a few years ago. She had a great run at Cal. She had been a coach, I think, at Richmond before that. Had a good run there. So Virginia tends to do things a little differently than some schools. The knee-jerk reaction kind of approach you see at some schools. And I would think, though, okay, that having been said, I would think that a couple factors with Dawn Staley probably made it hard to make a serious run at her. The biggest thing, probably the salary. She makes $1.5 million a year at South Carolina. That's what a lot more than a lot of Power 5 men's coaches make. Virginia certainly has the money. Virginia is one of the top 20 programs in the country in terms of athletic budgets, so they could, I'm sure, squeeze out a few $100,000 more for a women's coach if they wanted to, but I'm sure that was a factor. I'll say this too: Dawn Staley almost immediately tweeted out congratulations to her alma mater for the hire. Debbie Ryan was very quick to tweet out the same or comment the same with high praise for the move to hire Tina Thompson. So I think that indicates that maybe she wasn't even approached. I think you're right, Scott. Maybe she signaled that she wasn't interested. Virginia may have beat around the bushes a little bit in terms of maybe talking to an agent. Hey, is she really interested? Or was that just commentary for edification of the media? And nope, she's not. She's making good money here. She's happy here. She likes it here. That kind of thing. I don't know that we'll ever really know, Scott. I agree with you. Even when the question's asked tomorrow, which will probably be one of the first 2 or 3 questions asked tomorrow at the press conference, I don't know that, and I'm not saying that UVA will lie about it. They just will answer the question in a very legal, lawyerly kind of way, and I don't imagine we'll really know. But that said, I thought I would be disappointed when I heard, because I didn't assume that Staley would get the job. I assumed that all those other things would factor, and Virginia just wouldn't get, have the opportunity to hire Dawn Staley. I thought I was going to be disappointed. I thought, okay, they're going to not hire Dawn, and they're going to hire somebody that we've never heard of before who doesn't wow me at all, some coach from some mid-major that I don't really care about, and here we go. We're going to go back into mediocrity. I look at Tina Thompson's resume and say, wow, they did a good job. So I'm not only not disappointed, I'm actually excited for the potential for her to grow with this program. And I'm saying that in spite of how much I wanted Dawn Staley to be the coach. I think Tina Thompson has a potential to be just as good, if not better, as she grows into the coaching profession that, young as she is in it.
Yeah, and here's a term. I don't know whether I'm not going to give myself credit for coming up with it. I've heard it somewhere probably. Okay, so they didn't get whether they'd even tried to get. I mean, we talked about what a home run hire, what an instant injection of fan interest it would have been to hire Dawn Staley. It didn't happen. So the next best thing, in my opinion, was with the next hiring at UVA, would that hiring move the needle? And this hire has certainly moved the needle. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. This has got the interest of everyone across the country, as you just said about the tweets that came out, and I read a bunch more. Valerie Acton, who was a UVA graduate, who was, I think, the first commissioner of the WNBA, applauded this hire. Some people that are pretty in the circle, if you will, like this hire. So this hire, if nothing else, right off the bat, has moved the needle. I don't know many other hires that would have moved the needle. Like you said, hiring a coach from the mid-major program to come here, I think we'd be starting from ground zero, promoting Tim Taylor back up to head coach. I think that wouldn't have moved the needle. This, for now, has moved the needle, and I think that's what you're looking for. It's in terms of trying to get your fan base back, and this will be a great fan base. We know. I mean, there's no reason a very successful UVA women's program can't average 7,000-8,000 fans a game. Maybe more. It's marketing people at UVA, the ticket people, do some creative marketing to kind of turn buying a men's season ticket. Of course, that's not a problem right now, but maybe offering discounts for women or discounts for the local people in the surrounding counties. You could get 7,000 or 8,000 people out a night for women's basketball. So I think this hire definitely moves the needle somewhat. The other aspect, and I read something last night late, we all know about Dave Lato. As far as his career at UVA was, a failure. But we also know about the Dave Lato demeanor on the sideline. From what I have read, Dave Lato is a choir boy compared to Don Staley.
Well,
so you think that played into this any at all? Especially if Don makes that statement that she's not interested. Do you think that in the back of some people's minds, especially the women's game, where the noise level around the game itself isn't that distracting as it is in a men's game, do you think that could have played into this at all?
It's a great question, and I'll answer it with my thought this way. When my wife Crystal asked me yesterday, so yeah, Dawn Staley didn't get the job. You've been pushing for her to get the job. Why do you think they didn't go for her? My first answer to Crystal, just honestly talking, to someone I was trying to impart wisdom to, so to speak, wasn't about the money. I actually brought that up. I brought up the discussions we had behind the scenes in the media room there at John Paul Jones Arena the last couple of months, of the basketball season, talking about Dawn and how that had to be a factor, and also, we didn't talk about this in those little bowl sessions we had, but there was that whole weird thing between South Carolina and Missouri. If folks might have followed a little bit, or at least kind of followed in passing. I was sort of on Dawn Staley watch dating back to like December or so with this particular job. I thought would come open, and there were allegations of racial epithets at a South Carolina Missouri game, and then the back and forth between the athletics departments got out of hand. There were threats of lawsuits. I mean, I remember thinking at the time when that all was happening that's not going to be good for Virginia if they do want to offer Dawn Staley a job. They don't want to be in the middle of something like that. I mean, Dawn is passionate. That's part of what she does to make herself better, make her team better. But yeah, at Virginia, they want to win. They want to be passionate about it, but they do it a certain way. And I wasn't sure how that would translate either. And so, the money certainly a factor. Dawn interest, lack thereof, maybe a factor. But I've got to think that's a factor too. I mean, I even mentioned this to Crystal when I was talking about it. How Tony Bennett was told he has to wear a tie. He didn't wear a tie on the sidelines of Washington State, and one of them, hey, you're the coach at Virginia, you wear a tie. Little things like that.
Not only asked to wear a tie, but basically was told that it would be a deal breaker if he couldn't.
Yeah.
So, Tony tells that story that, it wasn't like, we'd like to, hope you'd consider wearing a tie, but, every coach has his own style. I mean, from what we were told, that story was that Little Page basically said, and this is what we expect. And you know, we talked about those little talks that we had during before a men's game in the media room. Those folks that we were talking to weren't they were connected to the program, very, very tightly connected to the program, probably as inside of the program as you could get. And that was the one concern from one of the individuals that I spoke with later, is that, you know, Don is such an intense, vocal, trying to say this as respectful as I can, coach, that, you know, Virginia would have to basically be told, you have to turn it down 3 or 4 notches. And I don't know, this is from this source, this quote was, I don't know if Don Staley has that knob on her, has that ability.
Yeah.
And I don't think she does. I mean, she wouldn't be the coach she is, maybe. So I don't know. Maybe we're just sour grapes that we're figuring out reasons that she wasn't asked or maybe wasn't offered the job. But for whatever reason, I was, from what I read, we all know about Dave Lato. Dave Lato is a saint on the sidelines compared to Don Staley.
Yeah, and Dave Lato was no saint on the sidelines. For those who remember being in JPJ when it was half empty because the teams were bad, and hearing him barrage his players. But yeah, that's, you know, I'm going to use that as a jumping off point, Scott. You talk about Dave Lato, Tony Bennett. Some news on the men's side. Let's get into that news real quick here too. We knew that there was a assistant coaching position opening because of the move of Ron Sanchez to UNC Charlotte. Jason Williford elevated to the position of associate head coach. Seems to be well deserved for Williford, and Orlando Van Dross has moved up from director of recruiting. He'll now actually be on the staff as a full-time assistant. And so, a couple moves, I guess, that we had presupposed a few weeks ago, Scott, when we first heard the news about Sanchez leaving for UNCC, that Tony would probably recruit from within. That does leave a position open now, replacing Van Dross as the director of recruiting and player development. But that's a more junior position. You can hire someone new in a position like that. I mean, Van Dross had served in that position at Virginia for 3 seasons. He came after, he had 18 years of Division I assistant coaching experience. He most recently, before that, had been an assistant coach at Charlotte, actually, UNC Charlotte for 5 years. He'd been at Boston University for a long time. So, he came from being a full-fledged assistant sitting on the bench during games with a suit and tie on to that director position that's more behind the scenes. So that shows the quality of guys that you have in that kind of job at Virginia, at least, and maybe some other places too. But we know at Virginia, and so he comes on. He's not somebody that you're bringing in to teach how to be an assistant coach. He's got a lot of pedigree as an assistant coach. And, of course, Williford played at Virginia. And actually played at Virginia the same time I was at Virginia. Great player in Virginia's past. And he's has a long history at Virginia now. He was an assistant coach at Boston University before joining the staff with Tony several years ago. He's been a key recruiter for this program. So I like both these moves. I mean, you're promoting from within. There's still a position to be filled, more junior position. This is continuity and stability for this program. And so, not going out and doing anything special, just promoting from within.
I agree. I can't add anything to that. I was hoping that was the path that Coach Bennett would take, and I didn't expect anything different. He remained loyal to his staff. I've known Jason since he played at UVA. He's an outstanding individual on and off the floor. Presents UVA just the way you would expect him to. Great recruiter. Van Dross, from what I understand, is a phenomenal recruiter. We haven't even mentioned the experience that Soderbergh brings. So the staff around Tony is pretty much intact. That position that Van Dross occupied will be filled. It could be filled internally. We don't know what's down the down the line from that, we don't get involved in that day to day, but that's not a real integral part of the, the game day preparations and things like that. I think it made sense on every, on every count. It was the thing to do.
So that's a lot of UVA basketball talk for April, including a lot of women's talk, and we'll be watching the news to see how how things flesh out, especially with Tina Thompson's staff and how she kind of gets things moving in that direction, and also recruiting, as we talked about too. It's an important time in recruiting for both men's and women's basketball, as we're seeing, and so we'll keep up with all that news and more. And Scott and I will get back together in a few days. We'll talk some more baseball. We talked O's yesterday. We'll talk some O's and Nats as the two teams make their way through the month of April. And
win last night, Chris. I don't know if you watched that, but
I did. Yeah, I watched the best part of that game. Yeah, they were down 6-1 in the eighth. Scored 6 in the eighth. The Mets bullpen imploding. I think they went through 5 pitchers. Yeah, 5 pitchers in that inning, and then the Nats were able to hold on. So, broken bat home run for Bryce Harper. One of the more interesting. I've seen a couple of broken bat home runs in my life on tape, but that one he had last night where he's holding the barrel in his hand, and a 406-foot home run with barrel, the bat broken off at the barrel like that, or basically the handle in his hand. So yeah, big win for the Nats. I've got VMI baseball this week, so we'll talk some VMI baseball, I'm sure. But yeah, a lot going on. We talk a lot of basketball during the winter months, but there's plenty of baseball and elsewise to keep us occupied. I guess spring football is ongoing. I'm not a big spring football person. Folks get all up in a lather about spring football, but Scott and I don't think either one really seem to put too much stock into getting too excited about your team in the spring. We'll focus more on as we get closer to summer and get into camp next August. But yeah, there's a lot of baseball and some basketball news here to keep us occupied. So happy to be able to talk about this hire today. So I think I'll go ahead and sign us off. For Scott German, I'm Chris Graham. Thank you for listening. Wahoo wah.